The sound of wailing sirens grew louder, but they weren't moving closer. My daughter's life depended on that ambulance, but it was stuck. Stuck behind the one person who had turned my life into a living hell. Karen Whitmore, the self-proclaimed queen of our neighborhood, stood with her arms crossed, blocking the cul-de-sac entrance with her golf cart. "Emergency vehicles need HOA authorization," she barked. I could barely see through the rage and panic clouding my vision. My 10-year-old, my little Lily, lay limp in my arms, her face pale, her breath shallow. Every second counted. Every second lost brought her closer to the edge. And this woman, this insufferable, power-drunk dictator, had decided that her rules were more important than my child's life. 12 hours earlier, everything had been normal. Lily and I had spent the afternoon drawing chalk art on the driveway, laughing as we turned the pavement into a masterpiece of swirls and doodles. She had always been a creative kid, full of life despite her weak heart. It was a condition we had managed since she was a baby, something I always feared but never let control our lives. But as the sun dipped below the horizon, she had suddenly gripped her chest, her face contorted in pain, and collapsed right in front of me. My heart stopped. I scooped her up, fumbling for my phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The operator was calm, but I wasn't. "My daughter has a heart condition. She's unconscious. We need help now." My voice cracked with desperation. They assured me an ambulance was en route. I hung up and tried to stay calm, whispering to Lily, willing her to hold on. Then I heard the sirens. Relief flooded me until I stepped outside and saw Karen. She stood in the middle of the road like some kind of neighborhood gatekeeper, her perfectly manicured nails tapping impatiently on her arm. The ambulance was flashing its lights, its driver honking furiously, but she didn't budge. "You can't just let emergency vehicles in whenever you want," she huffed, her expression one of pure irritation, as if she were being inconvenienced. I sprinted towards her, Lily limp in my arms. "Move. My daughter is dying," I screamed. Karen gave me a look of manufactured sympathy, then pointed to the HOA rulebook she carried like a Bible. "You didn't submit a request for emergency access," she said in a condescending tone. "And besides, if we allow this, people will start abusing the system." For a moment, my brain refused to process what I was hearing. My child was slipping away, and this woman was lecturing me about paperwork? "Are you out of your mind?" I shouted. "Get out of the way." The paramedics were already arguing with her. "Ma'am, this is a medical emergency. If you don't move, we'll be forced to call the police." Karen scoffed. "Oh please. I am the HOA president. I enforce the rules here." I didn't even think. I lunged forward, shoving past her, racing toward the ambulance. But Karen had done enough damage. The delay had cost us precious minutes. By the time the paramedics reached Lily and began working on her, her pulse was faint. Too faint. Everything after that was a blur. The ride to the hospital was suffocating. I sat beside Lily, gripping her tiny hand, praying harder than I ever had in my life. The paramedics worked furiously, their expressions unreadable. I felt helpless. Useless. Furious. If she didn't make it, no, I couldn't even think that. We burst into the ER and a team of doctors swarmed her. I was pushed to the waiting area, left alone with my thoughts. My mind raced back to Karen's smug face, her ridiculous excuses. I wanted to scream. I wanted to storm back to the neighborhood and destroy every petty rule she had ever written. Instead, I sat there, gripping the armrests of the chair so hard my knuckles turned white. An hour passed. Then another. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then finally, a doctor emerged. "She's stable," he said, and I nearly collapsed from relief. It was close. The delay made it worse, but she's a fighter. Fighter. My little warrior. But the fact that she had to fight at all, because of a woman obsessed with power, boiled my blood. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The next day I walked into the neighborhood meeting, my rage barely contained. Karen was there, sitting at the head of the HOA table like a queen overseeing her subjects. She had no idea what was coming. The next evening I walked into the HOA meeting hall, my hands clenched into fists at my sides. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting an artificial glow on the long table where the HOA board members sat, with Karen in the center like a self-appointed queen. She wore her usual smug expression, flipping through a stack of papers as if she hadn't almost cost my daughter her life the night before. I felt the weight of every set of eyes on me as I stepped forward, but I didn't care. Karen looked up, barely masking her annoyance. "Mr. Carter," she said with forced politeness, "this meeting is about community matters. If you're here to file a complaint, there's a proper process." I slammed my hand down on the table, making the board members jump. "A proper process? You mean like the process my daughter was supposed to go through while she was dying in my arms because you decided to play God with the ambulance?" My voice echoed through the room, filled with raw, unfiltered rage. Karen's expression hardened. "Oh, don't be dramatic. She got medical attention, didn't she? The system works when we follow the rules." A murmur ran through the room. Several neighbors had shown up to the meeting, and I could see the shock and discomfort on their faces. People were starting to whisper, to exchange glances. Karen might have controlled the rules, but even she couldn't control the tide of public opinion shifting against her. One of the board members, an older woman named Linda, cleared her throat. "Karen, is this true? You stopped the ambulance from getting through?" Karen rolled her eyes. "I didn't stop anyone. I was simply making sure the protocol was followed. If we start making exceptions, where does it end?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "It ends at basic human decency," I shot back. "It ends at not letting a 10-year-old suffer just so you can feel powerful." A man from the back of the room, Mr. Thompson, spoke up. "I saw the whole thing. She blocked the road on purpose. That ambulance had to fight to get through. It was sickening." More murmurs. More shifting. Karen's face twitched. She wasn't used to being challenged, and she definitely wasn't used to losing control. "Enough of this nonsense," she snapped. "We have real issues to discuss, like Mr. Carter's ongoing violations. His yard has been in violation for weeks." I let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, we're really doing this? You want to talk about my lawn right now?" Karen's face turned red, but she recovered quickly. "The HOA has standards, Jake. If you can't follow them, maybe you shouldn't live here." That was the moment I knew this wasn't just about me. This was about power, about control, about her belief that she could dictate the lives of everyone around her without consequence. But what she didn't know was that I had spent the past 24 hours doing my own research. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and pulled out a thick folder from under my arm. "Since you love rules so much, Karen, let's talk about the rules you've been breaking." The room fell silent. Karen's smug expression faltered. I tossed the first document onto the table. "Here's proof that you've been using HOA funds for personal expenses. A $3,500 charge for landscaping. Only it wasn't for a neighborhood project, was it? It was for your private backyard." A gasp rippled through the crowd. Karen stiffened but said nothing. I threw down another paper. "And here's the record of fines you've issued to homeowners for violations that don't exist anywhere in the bylaws. Hundreds of dollars in fabricated charges, all conveniently against people who have challenged you in the past." Another paper. "Oh, and this one's my favorite. The letter from the county stating that you failed to file HOA financial reports for the last 2 years. Do you know what that means, Karen? It means legal trouble. Real, actual big trouble." Karen's face had gone from red to pale in a matter of seconds. "This is nonsense," she stammered. "Where did you even get this?" I crossed my arms. "Public records. You'd be surprised what you can find when you look." The board members shuffled uncomfortably. Linda picked up one of the documents, scanning it with growing horror. "Karen, is this true?" Karen let out a dry laugh, but it was weak, unconvincing. "This is ridiculous. These accusations are baseless." "Then you won't mind if we call for an independent audit?" I said, my voice razor sharp. Silence. Then from somewhere in the back of the room a voice spoke. "I second that." It was Mr. Patel, my neighbor, the one who used to be a lawyer before he retired. Karen turned on him. "You don't have the authority." "Oh, but we do," he interrupted. "According to HOA regulations, any 3 board members can request an audit if financial discrepancies are suspected." He looked at Linda. "What do you think?" Linda hesitated, then nodded. "I think it's necessary." Another board member, Mr. Harris, nodded as well. "Agreed." Karen shot to her feet. "This is absurd. I have done nothing wrong." But she had lost control. The whispers in the room had grown into full-blown discussions. People were pulling out their phones, looking up legal implications. Someone was recording. The walls were closing in on her, and for the first time I saw fear in her eyes. I leaned in, lowering my voice just enough for her to hear. "You tried to play God with my daughter's life. Now karma's coming for yours." Her lips trembled, but no words came out. The meeting ended in chaos. Karen stormed out, her face a mask of barely contained rage, but she wasn't in charge anymore. The board had officially moved to suspend her pending an investigation. The HOA members were demanding answers. And I, finally, after all the hell she had put us through, was watching her world crumble. But this wasn't over. Not yet. Because karma wasn't just knocking. It was about to kick the door down. The downfall of Karen Whitmore was nothing short of spectacular. After the HOA meeting, the news of her corruption spread like wildfire. The very people who had once cowered under her ridiculous rules were now the ones demanding her head on a platter. The board members, eager to distance themselves from the sinking ship that was Karen's reign, wasted no time in launching the financial audit. And what they uncovered was worse than anyone had expected. It turned out that Karen hadn't just been misusing HOA funds for landscaping. She had funneled thousands into her personal expenses, expensive spa days, shopping sprees, and even a vacation to the Bahamas, all under the guise of community development. Worse yet, she had been illegally inflating fines and pocketing the extra money, scamming homeowners out of their hard-earned cash for years. The board, now united in their fury, immediately voted for her permanent removal and reported her to the authorities. Karen, of course, did not go down quietly. She stormed into the next meeting, screaming about conspiracies and personal vendettas, accusing everyone of turning against her unfairly. But this time no one was afraid of her. No one backed her up. Even the people who had once been her allies were suddenly silent, unwilling to sync with her. When the police showed up with subpoenas for her financial records, her rage turned into panic. 2 weeks later, Karen was officially stripped of her position. But karma wasn't done with her yet. As the audit continued, authorities discovered that her fraudulent activities extended beyond the HOA. She had evaded taxes, faked documents, and even committed fraud on official forms. Charges were filed, and in what was perhaps the most ironic twist of all, she found herself on the receiving end of the very same bureaucratic nightmare she had once inflicted on others. With her power gone and her name disgraced, Karen's perfect life started unraveling at an alarming speed. Her husband, realizing the extent of her crimes, filed for divorce. The lavish home she had used as her personal throne was suddenly at risk as legal fees piled up. She tried to sue the HOA, claiming wrongful termination, but with mountains of evidence against her, the case was thrown out immediately. Desperate and drowning in legal battles, she had no choice but to sell her house, the house she had once lorded over the neighborhood from. That was the moment I knew fate had a sense of humor. I had been keeping an eye on the listing, and the day it hit the market I made a move. With the help of a few neighbors who had also suffered under Karen's reign, I placed an offer. A low one. An insultingly low one. And to everyone's surprise, it was accepted. Karen was out of options, and her once prized home was now nothing more than an asset she needed to liquidate fast. The day of the final sale, I made sure to be there. When she saw me signing the papers, her face twisted into something between horror and rage. I half expected her to launch into one of her infamous speeches, but there was nothing left to say. She had lost. The woman who had once stood between my daughter and an ambulance was now watching me take ownership of the house she had cherished more than anything. As I left the realtor's office, I spotted her sitting alone on a bench outside, staring into the distance. For a moment I almost felt bad for her. Almost. But then I remembered Lily, pale and breathless in my arms, and the fury came rushing back. Karen had brought this on herself. Her downfall became neighborhood legend. People who had once feared her now laughed about her demise. The HOA was restructured under new leadership, this time with fair policies and actual community engagement. The ridiculous rules that Karen had enforced with an iron fist were thrown out, one by one. No more unnecessary fines, no more abuse of power. The neighborhood, for the first time in years, started to feel like home again. But the most poetic part of it all was what happened to Karen afterward. With no job, no money, and no reputation left, she had to find work somewhere. And that was how, a few months later, I found myself face to face with her again. This time at a local supermarket where she stood behind a cash register, scanning groceries with a forced smile. I was with Lily, who had fully recovered and was healthier than ever. She tugged on my sleeve and whispered, "Dad, isn't that?" I nodded, keeping my expression neutral as I placed my items on the belt. Karen's face burned with humiliation as she recognized me. For a moment she looked like she was going to say something, but instead she just scanned the items in silence. As I handed her the cash, I smiled. "Rules are rules, Karen. You know how it is." Her lips tightened, but she said nothing. As I walked away, I heard Lily giggle. "She got what she deserved, didn't she?" I ruffled her hair. "Yeah, sweetheart. She really did." That evening, the neighborhood threw a block party. A real one, not the stiff, overly policed events Karen had once dictated. Music played, kids ran through the streets, and laughter filled the air. It felt like a fresh start, like the weight of tyranny had finally lifted. Mrs. Donovan, the elderly neighbor who had helped me that night when Karen blocked the ambulance, raised a toast. "To karma," she said, grinning. "May it always find the right people." The crowd erupted in cheers. I looked around, feeling a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. Lily was happy, the community was stronger than ever, and the nightmare that had been Karen Whitmore was nothing more than a bad memory. As the sun set over the street that had once been a battleground, I realized something. Justice isn't always served in the way you expect. Sometimes, it comes in the form of an audit. Sometimes, it comes in the form of a lost lawsuit. And sometimes, it comes in the form of a former dictator forced to scan groceries for the very people she once tormented. Either way, karma always delivers.